Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Chen Ravid from Exascode, the platform for connecting with open source developers. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hacktoberfest is a month-long celebration of open source software, and it's a great way to start contributing to open source projects or contribute more if you're already doing so. At Exascode, we're passionate about open source, and our small contribution to this global event is this series of webinars where we host selected open source developers and learn about their projects. Today, I'm very pleased to host Guy Sheffer, co-founder and VP of R&D at ShapeDo by day, and open source Raspberry Pi guru by night. Guy is the author of OctoPi, a Raspberry Pi distribution for 3D printers, and FullPageOS, a Raspberry Pi distribution for displaying web pages in full screen. And to our viewers, while we are talking, you can send us questions and comments on YouTube or Facebook, and I'll be sure to ask Guy at the end of the webinar. Guy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
It's great to have you. So can you tell us a bit about yourself and how you got involved with open source?
Sure. Well, open source is a while back. Around high school, there was a Linux club in Jerusalem, and we used to meet weekly and talk about open source software. That was like my first actual engagement with people who do open source software and talk about it. And it's funny you mentioned that, because some of the people there are people I'm in contact with today. So
really?
It's
so many years.
Yeah, it's like 20 years by now, I would say. So
Crazy.
It's been quite a long time. But I think the time I actually got to actually code real open source stuff that got out, and I think OctoPi is like the biggest thing that I've been doing so far, was around 2013. I've been doing open source stuff on and off, and various things, and worked a lot with Linux at the time. But the major step for OctoPi was when I ordered a 3D printer on a Kickstarter, which was around that time you would order them around on Kickstarter, and it got stuck. The company who did it went bust. They managed to make the printer, but it was stuck in China.
Okay.
While waiting for this printer, I started figuring out how to connect to it and how to do it, and I realized that there's this really cool project called Octoprint, which is what OctoPi runs, and Octoprint had a very complicated way of getting it to work, and the best way to run it was on a Raspberry Pi, these small computers. And I started figuring out how to make something that's easy to install, and that's how OctoPi started. OctoPi made Octoprint suddenly much more popular. So Gina Hoyske, who's the creator and maintainer of Octoprint, and she's a wonderful person to work with, has suddenly saw like that was a big adoption, and it became now one of the de facto ways to run 3D printers.
Amazing.
I've seen guides now, and the guides actually ignore the part where you install OctoPi. So I see that as a success because it's so clear how to do that.
That's great. So it was difficult, to get it up and running, or was it difficult to just operate?
It was difficult to get it up and running. Right, it's up and running. It's a web interface. It's really easy. To some extent self-explanatory. But this is, I think, one of the major things that I think I do that most of my Raspberry Pi distributions are good at. If you ever try doing something in Raspberry Pi, you usually open up something which would be called as a guide. You'll have a long document explaining you what you have to do, what you have to install, and I find that means that a lot of people have Raspberry Pis laying at home not doing anything. So maybe someone in the audience actually has that problem. What I've built is a way to take a Raspberry Pi image or any machine, any SMB, whatever the small computer devices that take the image, modify it, and then repackage it. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes in the background, which you can see in the project. But that made it made it possible to suddenly install much more complicated software without starting to configure all these very small steps which you usually miss and do run wrong. And another thing it did, which was really cool, and I think it really shows you what the power is in open source, is that since everybody had access to the same software and could see what they're running and and you could get contributions, it suddenly made it have much more rich content. I think the first thing we've had that was contributed was a way to decide if you have a webcam attached to the Pi or the Raspberry Pi official camera, which is two different devices.
Yeah.
If you run a guide, you will only set the one you have. But if you have this thing that knows how to pick what's the best setting, then it helps everyone in the end.
Yeah. It's very rare to find open source projects that take into account installation and make things easy to work. And sometimes a lot of open source projects suffer from not just for lack of documentation, but just the lack of getting started easily.
Yeah, a lot of them also don't even assume what you need to run it. You open this project and you, what do I need? I need a computer, I need a Raspberry Pi, I need a tablet, and you don't have any document of what you actually have to physically do to get it to actually work. And I think OctoPi is, we have hundreds of thousands of people download it, and you get the occasional, I need to, how exactly you flash an image, but that's kind of rare. I've had even people on GitHub saying, how do you do something? And you would reply with, you apt-get install it, you run the command in the Raspberry Pi that installs it, and they're like, what does that mean? They didn't realize that it's running, and there was the humorous view of it is that it's a way of I'm not sure how the Raspberry Pi Foundation would take that, because their goal is to teach people how to make computers, and we're finding ways to get them to run it even easier. But I think that it's a really important thing. If you want to get your project to be used by that mass of people, like the amount that you can't really help each person, and then it needs to be self-explanatory.
I agree.
And eventually, once you write it good enough, not perfect, sometimes it's actually a good strategy to leave this annoying little feature that's really easy to fix just hanging there for someone, because someone might come and fix that, and once they've fixed, they've done that, you'll get more contributions, and I've seen that happen in several of my projects.
We'll talk more a bit about contributions in a few minutes. So we spoke about OctoPi. Can you tell us a bit about FullPageOS as well? Yeah,
FullPageOS started from a weekend. I had a friend who said that he wants to use it for mixing video channels, something much more complicated, much more like specific. And I said, this seems like big. Let's make it much more simple. Let's just make a operating system, the Raspberry Pi, you flash it. The only thing it does, you have a text file. You can just put a list of links, and it opens them on a full page. That's all it does. In the basic thing, it has a few other bells and whistles, like it has a welcome screen, but that's mostly what it does. And I remember actually pitching that to posting on the Raspberry Pi forum, hey, do you think this might be interest to anyone? People saying, no, there's guides. Why would you need that? And I released it, and it took about half a year to just sat there with no traffic at all. And it then got published on one big news upvote groups called Hacker News, and then suddenly there was 2,000 stars in a week, and people started downloading it, and then a lot of people started using it. I think OctoPi is nice because there's a very good, there's a big active user base that specifically does that. It's also very active. You see that there's a lot of people forking it, and companies are taking it and using it, making their own flavor, but they're still saying that what they're selling is a printer which runs Octoprint with OctoPi. But FullPageOS made all these really unusual people using it, and I get some idea of what's going on from issues on my GitHub. But I think that's a way to show that sometimes the guide isn't what you need. You need this really easy way to do something.
It runs Chromium on Raspberry Pi to show the pages?
Yeah, it runs Chromium. There are also some people who added explanations in the GitHub how to put Firefox to run it, but I never really tried that.
Yeah.
That's something I should really note. All this is like you mentioned it's what I do by night, but it's what I do in every other night. You can't do this every night.
Every night. Yeah.
So FullPageOS is like I get a lot of requests and a lot of people asking to put certain features, and sometimes you have to say sort of, no, you're welcome to do this. I'll help you even to. I have this policy of I'll help you explain to you how you could do that, but I'm not going to do it for you.
Yeah. Well, that's the nature of open source. People need to contribute.
Yeah, it's not necessarily though. Some people just sort of put something out and they disappear, and I've had projects like that. Yeah. There's a project we still don't have no idea what happened to the main developer. Just
vanished.
Yeah, with like hundreds of people. Yeah, and people. So that's that project called Own Photos OS. It's like a photo gallery that tags all the faces in it, and you can sort of search for people like Google Photos, but completely self-hosted. So
cool.
Something that people want, and
yeah.
It disappeared. So what I think though about OctoPi is you have to build it in a way that even if I completely disappear off the face of the earth, people know how to run this already. There's enough people around that will survive. Also known as the bus factor. How many people you need to be hit by a bus so your code base is completely unknown? That's a real thing. So there's a slightly higher bus factor here.
Yeah. Okay. That's very macabre. So we've spoken a bit about the people around the projects. Can you tell us a bit about the community, how active it is? Do you get a lot of contributions?
Yeah. In OctoPi, I've like rarely done. I do like small things that sort of have to be done. Like now, Raspberry Foundation added 64-bit images as opposed to the 32-bits which have been running, which is what they've provided in the last I don't know, from 2011, 9 years since it's running. So this month, so that's this kind of thing that if you don't come in and say, okay, this is how we're going to build 64 bits with the current system, then people don't know where to act. But nearly most, like I think all the major contributions in the last few years are the people. I sort of just review it, make sense, pull it in, maybe tell them to change something. FullPageOS the same. This week there was a very interesting actually incident. Someone posted like two fixes in the same issue. Like I think I have it here somewhere. He added some feature of how to start Chromium. Exactly, I think something related also to this, like running it with something apart from Chromium. And someone replied. This is like someone I never seen before in my life. Replied, please split the merge request to separate merge requests. I'm like, why where did he come from? And I'm like, I wrote like seems good to me, you know, why but I'm waiting for a reply from him because this guy seems to be really important to him that we would split this. And he's like, why would you split the request? And he says, to have commits that only change one thing at a time, it's a habit of good software development.
So he's policing your pull requests.
Yeah, now you know he's right. That's how you should do it. But I'm like, sure, that would make sense. But I'm one person, and I'm reviewing only this one. And you know, you need to sometimes cut corners and save time on these kind of projects. So, but you get contributions and you get like people coming in, and that's really helpful. Some of them are like, you know, you open your like a few hours later or a day later or something, and you see that someone had this really complicated question, and then someone replies with like, you should look over here, you should look over there, and these people like come again and again to help out, which is
that's great.
I'm really grateful that these people exist that help you out, help other people out, just out of kindness.
That's great, and it's a sign of a healthy community around the project. If you see others helping others, it's a good sign. So do you have any interesting use cases for places your code was used? Either of your projects, any interesting anecdotes?
Yes, quite a few. That people up. I've started to compile a list. I always thought that one day I'll do like this GitHub issue stand-up comedy thing. So maybe I'll try something now. There was that time around 2016 that every month or so, every other month, I would get a job offer from a 3D printer startup company that needs someone to maintain their OctoPi image. That was like a ongoing one. I don't have anyone specific. I had a company called KRUU who do photo booths, and they've used FullPageOS for their UI, like to run the UI for the photo booths. They sold the fix on the email. They said they rent them. They have about 1,000 machines running this, and they asked for some advice. I had a guy running them in a church in the US with 30 screens, run Raspberry Pi, piping them to 30 different screens.
30 on one Pi?
Yes. Well, he was using, the issue was about this piece of hardware which is made by a company called Black Magic, which I somehow seem to remember. Catchy name.
Video equipment company.
Yeah, so he used that. So you use one Pi and you stream it out. I also had someone who used it for like a TV network, and they wanted they had like a football match, and you have like the bar at the bottom with the score. So they would have that, and then the green screen, and they would like connect together with other software, like with other video equipment, the video and the score. I think the biggest one I've had was you start by getting, a lot of these stories start by this is like from the end, but this one I'll start from the start. You get this guy posting in GitHub, hi, I want to upgrade 150 of these. And scenario that you don't think about in weekend project, because I had like one, maybe two in a good day around. And so I asked, so I told him, it's a bit, we didn't really think of this, but why would you want to do that? Like the first thing I did is I calculated how much power is this taking. 100 Pis times the 5 watts they take. That's like, it's starting to build up towards kilowatts, not including screens.
Yeah.
And he said, and I'll quote this because I like this one. May I ask why you're running them? And he writes, we are one of the largest e-bicycle production in Europe, Lithuania-based. We produce 500,000 bikes every year. So next time you ride the bike on the street, probably in Europe, if you see one, it's possible it was made with a company using your FullPageOS.
Really? That's awesome.
Yeah, so each time I see a bicycle now in Europe.
That's great.
So these are really big uses for this piece of software, which obviously I never conceived of when I started it. I literally started it in a hackathon. And he got people started answering that GitHub issue, and I wasn't always the one who knew what to say. But putting it either in GitHub or in OctoPi, we have a discourse, like a forum community, which is very active. Having that place for people to talk about how to run stuff, you'll find like issues you would never have if you just sort of posted it somewhere, and something even in places like chats, like there are projects I've been running on that, but if you put it on something which is ephemeral, it doesn't last long, like a discourse or even IRC, though IRC I still find that's useful sometimes. It doesn't stay, and like going back to some of these issues are issues that have been like around for like 2 years, and people still going into them. So that tends to help because people sort of build on top.
Yeah.
Are there any questions?
Yeah. So that's interesting anecdotes, and it's always amazing to see that an open source project starts somewhere, and then others take it to places you've never imagined it will. I bet you never imagined it would be on bikes from Lithuania.
Nope.
So let's talk a bit about challenges. Open source can be challenging, and a lot of developers struggle with many things. So can you tell us a bit about the challenges you face when developing?
Yeah. So I have to try and break it down from challenges that for our project specific. I think one of the main challenges we had specifically in Raspberry Pi stuff, but you could probably replace that with any other organization, is the Raspberry Pi Foundation are not so communicative when it comes to telling us when a new device is going to come out, if they're going to change something. Like, we find about the 64-bit builds like everybody else when they came out. Sometimes a day later. And we never know what's going to come out, what's going to be thrown at us. And I think that's something that happens to a lot of people in open source. You don't know when something's going to change. You run this piece of software and you maybe install something, it pulls the dependencies, and suddenly there's a new dependency that breaks everything because someone released a version 3.0 and you never knew about it. So sometimes it's really nice, and we try in OctoPi, for example, we have nightly builds, and I think that's generally good when you do open source. Have something released to people without your hand into it, without you putting your hand and actually building something. Because that means every night someone can test Octoprint, and people, the build system fell down this week because some storage became unavailable. People started complaining, so people are using this, and when something comes in, they tell you about it. So I'm running to the solution, but a challenge of figuring out how you make yourself dependent, like use and utilize other people's work, which is important in open source, but also you're self-reliant to, and also coordinate with other people. So another thing that's happening now in OctoPi is that we're moving to Python version 3. Until now, the build was Python version 2, which reached its end of life at the beginning of this year. So we're a little late, but this, it really makes a lot of people have to adapt their plugins and stuff like that. So getting that that's definitely a challenge that I think maybe going to. I'm not sure how we can completely make that disappear. Probably a constant challenge for everyone.
Yeah, probably it's a challenge for everyone.
We also had people. I think another thing is to know when to say no. We've had people. There's some people who come and start asking for feature requests and sort of don't realize in some cases that you're the only person on the project sometimes, or that you're doing it in your free time. They think you're part of a company that's doing this. It's weird how people got used to there's a company behind this piece of software. It's not just one person. And I think it's really important to stress it out to people that you're a volunteer, that it's 100% your time. In my case, Gina gets she has a Patreon and people fund her, but the make of Octoprint. But I don't have that. I did put a PayPal donation about a year or two ago in my project. I realized that helps people understand that where you are. It's helpful. It also means that if people really want you to do something, they have a sort of way to vent it, or people feel that you've helped them a lot. So I think that sometimes that's a good way to sort of tell people where you're standing, because other people we've had people coming and say complain about stuff and we're like, it's just us, how are they able to do that? It's just us.
Yeah. So people sometimes can feel entitled because they're using your software, but then they don't realize that they're getting it for free and they're not entitled to pretty much anything other than using the code you're writing. Yeah. They don't have the right of making demands.
Yeah, I think it's okay to have some criticism to how project works. There are a few projects I've worked with where there's bad documentation on changes, for example. There's a few major projects I won't mention, but you can see that there's the GitHub comments, the comments of what's changed in the code are blank, and you're like, I'm using this in my day. What's even going on here? Some of them are really big. I mean, stuff that probably being used in the web page we're talking about through now, probably that software used to process some of the stuff there. So I understand it's okay to say, hey, these guys are not doing it, so probably not working in the best practice, but making demands is slightly different. In many cases, it's also good to channel people and say, look, you can pay someone to do this. Here's the code that will help you. I'll give them feedback. I think that sort of diffuses a bit of that as well.
Yeah.
People realize that they can do this on their own.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I know that a lot of open source developers struggle, mixing their daily work and working on their open source projects. How do you mix the two? How does that work for you?
I think initially I found it this is completely different. It varies from person to person, but and it also depends on the kind of work. Sometimes it's just reviewing a pull request and looking at it during the day, and it's not that different than aimlessly scrolling in Facebook, which people find themselves doing today. So I think that's one way to do it. But I think mostly is to know when to postpone, to say, okay, I have all these issues. It's nothing critical. I'll wait until a weekend, or eventually, get back to people. If there's something that's important, then I might make a little bit of time for it. If there's something big that needs to happen, then sometimes you do need to put the weekend. Sometimes I've had big features that had to wait. I think I've read people talking about, I ran this project and I just couldn't handle it because people were talking to me every day, and I just couldn't, and so I left it and I completely abandoned it. And you see these projects that sort of died. And I think another way of handling it once you get that to that volume is to have someone else involved. And in nearly every project that I've overtaken, I have someone else involved in some manner or form. In Octoprint, in OctoPi, it's easy because Gina runs Octoprint and she does the test. She's recently also built one of the more astounding testing rigs I've seen. She has a whole bunch of Raspberry Pis with a multiplexer, which lets automatically connect an SD card and run upgrade scenarios. So
really, sounds
something
cool.
I would never build. It's really cool. If anyone's doing Raspberry Pi upgrades, that's a really cool thing to look at. She documented everything. In FullPageOS, the guys, I started it with a person who had a request. A friend of mine, Taylor, said, I need something to channel videos. And there's a few other. Both of these distributions, I should mention this, both of these use the library which I've eventually built out of both of them called CustomPiOS, which is you build any Raspberry Pi custom operating system. I had 7 others of these with various degrees of usage. Yeah. Magic Mirror OS started this year, has already about 2,500 people using it. It took it first 1,000 in a month. That it's for the smart mirrors. You can talk to them and tell you the weather and stuff. Yeah. I don't have one. I never did. But there was a lot of requests from the community there, and I said I stressed I don't want to maintain that, but someone you need to be the maintainer. I'll just build the first thing that runs the operation.
Just the basis of it.
Just the basis, and it's been maintained since. He replies if people ask stuff in the repo, even though the repository is under my name. I barely touch that. He's a collaborator.
That's great.
Yeah, so I think most of them. There's there's a real-time kernel for Raspberry Pi project that I've been maintaining, but since less people are active in maintaining it, that one is getting less treatment now. So I think that's crucial, because you wanted people, if you wanted to become so successful that everyone's using it, or even if you just wanted to become successful to the point where you don't have to do a lot of work because people are writing your own software because you're getting all the contributions, it writes itself. Yeah. You need more people to be able to give more people autonomy to modify stuff, or to ask to modify stuff.
That's great. And I think it's a healthy approach to have someone else with you. And there's a lot of people complain about burnout and people who are abandoning projects because they can't handle the amount of requests and bugs they are getting from developers, and sometimes just being one guy that has a day job, it's just too much, and a lot of people complain about that. So I definitely agree. It's a healthy habit of having not just contributors but collaborators, as you said, that can help not just with coding, but also with triage and managing and making sure things move along. And so maybe you want to share with us any stuff about the future. Do you have any interesting or exciting items on your roadmap we should expect?
Yeah. So in the current projects, there's a lot of things that sort of, I think, we want to have them in OctoPi. The Python 3 is already in the nightly builds. Now we have to come to get the nightly builds running again. There should be already. There might be a build by now. I haven't checked. Run it this morning. So a lot of maintenance is just making sure things still run. Another thing that we want to add is the 64 builds. It's already there were a few nightlies of that, but we're not sure yet if they work well. We are using the community a lot for testing. People have also it's useful. People who use 3D printers and who are makers tend to be more enthusiastic about testing stuff. I get much more reports on what works and what doesn't with Watch Printer in OctoPi than in FullPageOS. Like people say my HDMI screen doesn't work, and I have no idea what that means.
But makers are a lot of times they're more technical and like to play around. Yeah.
You can see that difference in the communities. And now the thing I'm really working on in the last weekends when I have time is I want to make 2 new Raspberry Pi distributions. So it's been easy to make new ones. I've had Raspberry Pi distribution I wrote in 1 hour, compiled in 3, published in 9 because the upload took time that day, and it was then tweeted by the official project, Electric Sheep Pi, which does nice animations. But what I want to do, what I'm trying to build now is a distribution that you attach a hard drive to your Raspberry Pi, you put it at your friend's. I have a friend for that plan. I didn't plan this on my own, and likewise he's going to place one in my house. And we have a desktop. I'm writing a desktop application that makes periodic backups of any folders you want in your operating system on your computer, and with the history and increments and like incremental history. So
that's great.
That's been taking longer than I thought. There's another distribution I've published but haven't wrote about it yet, which basically is a plug-and-play instance of Pleroma. Pleroma is part of the federated distributed social network, known as Fediverse. It's not as popular, not as known as Mastodon, which is sort of behaves like a copy of Twitter in many ways, but it's distributed, meaning other people run it. So my idea was, let's see if we can get more people using social networks if they can run their own social network on their Pi. So it works. I haven't had enough time to write about this yet. Sometimes the documentation, I'm not going to release something and tell people about it before I have the actual documentation of this is what you have to do to run it, because they'll just see a project they don't know how to run.
Yeah, that's good practice there. So if people want to start contributing to one of your projects, can you give us any tips of getting started, or what you like to see in contributions, or what you like getting from contributors?
Yeah, there's a sort of a checklist. Also, there's a question in the forums. Should we answer that first, or should we wait?
Yeah, sure. Let's go ahead.
I'll get back to you. So the Raspberry Pi Foundation has its own magazine. They often feature projects and developers. Has Guy ever been, I guess that's me, has ever been in the person featured in the magazine? So not really. We've had projects. Octoprint has been featured in the Raspberry Pi magazine, but they don't always mention that I maintain the distributions. We've tried contacting the foundation to coordinate with them on releases, but that doesn't seem to have worked. I'm enthusiastic about the Raspberry Pi, and they do seem to push a lot of the innovation in these kind of devices, but they are not so well in communicating with us. And it's a shame, because we've so far managed to to when the Raspberry Pi 3 came out, we were the first place I know to discover that it had Wi-Fi issues, including the CTO of Raspberry Pi Foundation commenting in our GitHub and and seeing what users report, because we were fast enough to release an image that people were actually using and finding that they have problems. Also, when there was this time where they moved versions in something and they released an image and we saw that there was a problem, so we made everything work. And then 2 weeks ago, they reverted that problem. Obviously, someone didn't realize that they upgraded a specific version of Debian. Yeah. So unfortunately, no. They do mention some of the things. I think Lifehacker featured FullPageOS. There are quite a few places that mention it, but Raspberry Pi Foundation never really spoke to us apart from like basic communication with Gina, but they never actually replied to us, which is where I'm saying it's a shame. I've had a post in the group saying maybe we should do released candidates, but they say that there are reasons they can't, like hardware vendors telling them that they don't want to really tell people what they're releasing before they release it and stuff like that.
So we're calling the Raspberry Pi organization to the Raspberry Pi Foundation to take note and act. And
it would be nice. We might be able to solve things before they happen, and we might even be able to have things ready when a new device comes out.
Yeah, yeah, sure, go ahead.
We're still I was going to say we're still chasing the 64-bit build for people who have Raspberry Pi 8 gigabytes, which is the latest version of Raspberry Pi, because we only got it at some point.
Yeah, I think generally it's a good idea for companies to be connected to the community that's building around their projects and releasing, release candidates, beta versions, sharing their roadmap. I think it's just for their own good and building a healthy community around their projects.
Yeah. So it's surprising because the Raspberry Pi Foundation is very communicative in many other ways. I think they're focusing on their own field. They're a foundation to teach kids about computers in the UK. Yeah. Which is very specific. Also, that means that the part of the Raspberry Pi kernel is forked from the mainline kernel. So some things don't work so well when it comes to USB drivers. I've had that problem in the real-time Raspberry Pi kernel project, the real-time Pi, which is strange because like a lot of copycat Chinese vendors or various other companies don't have mainline kernels on their devices, which is sometimes better. We've always had that question: should we also support something else? But we never. It's just the Raspberry Pi has been so popular that it's hard to shift.
Yeah.
You were going to ask me something earlier.
Yeah, I asked about any tips for new contributors or what you like to see in contributions.
Yeah. So there are a few tips. I think we've touched on them, but it's always useful to spell these things out loud. Put a place for people to talk. GitHub, Discourse, hopefully something with a bug tracker. In FullPageOS, it's just a bug tracker really, because it's something that keeps history. That tends to get people talking, and eventually they solve problems you haven't thought about.
Yeah.
Another thing is nightly builds. It's not super crucial, even if a lot of my distributions it's a nightly build, but I press a button and it builds a new one. Sometimes someone sends a contribution, you press build, the result pops up, they can test it, and sometimes you might even just release from that because it's something which people want to have.
Yeah.
Make someone else involved if possible, as much as you can. So I mentioned that before, but also I can give another example. Zintian, a Raspberry Pi distribution for synthesizers. I came in and helped them, but the main guy who maintains it now is Joseph Fernando, who's one of the main contributors there. If you get people to use your stuff or have some kind of input, then it tends to make the thing going. It makes your project keep going and makes it sustainable. I don't know. So That's another one. Good documentation. I think good documentation is always good in good software, but I think you need in open source projects where someone doesn't necessarily have the incentive to get your thing to work. It needs to be like 2 lines, 3 lines, sentence, 5 steps, something that's even have screenshots of what they're supposed to see in the end, because they don't know what to expect in many cases.
Yeah.
That really helps. In the electric sheep project, I have a picture of a screen with the animation, because otherwise people don't know what they're installing, or they don't know even if it's worth starting to install it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's small. It's especially in Raspberry Pi distributions. It's a few short steps, but sometimes downloading the image takes a few minutes because it's up to a gigabyte of storage. In Zinfian, it's I think like 4 gigabytes. It's a lot to download. And another like a last tip, which is asking for tips. Sometimes putting a donation button helps. I did it 2 years ago, and the project's been running for 6 years, and I think I should have done it earlier. It's not necessarily because of the tips, but because it's a way of saying what you want from the project. Saying what you want to people, what they should expect from you is a good thing. Saying I don't have time for this, so you're welcome to help do it, or saying I don't think this is a good idea for the project, or this is, but I have no idea how to start. Sometimes people would come in and help out with that. So that's another tip.
Okay, that's good advice, and I hope our viewers who are considering starting their own projects will take note and follow these important tips for getting started. And this is pretty much all the time we had for today. So, Guy, thank you so much for doing this and providing some of the insights and information about these really cool 2 projects. And to our viewers, thanks for joining us. And stay tuned on our social channels on the Access Code Twitter account, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And check out our blog at accesscode.com for more information and more developer spotlights coming up soon. Thank you so much, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.